This episode of Cross Politic is brought to you by... This episode is... Gabe, I don't think we have anybody for this episode. You know, if you listen to Cross Politic and you want to advertise on our show, you should get this spot. You can get it at crosspolitic.com. What, Gabe? Email us? Where? What email address? You didn't write it on the paper. I don't know if it's not on the paper, just like the person whose spot is supposed to be. I don't know who I'm...
Contact at crosspolitic.com.
Oh, now you want to pick up the mic. What is it again?
Contact at crosspolitic.com.
Yeah, what he said.
Contact at crosspolitic.com.
Oh, now you're going to gang up on me. What you want to say, Pastor?
Cross Politic begins in 3, 2, 1.
I'm a heart that breaks for a dying city.
Stop cursing your future.
Is not true.
For all intents and purposes, I am a woman.
No government, no political system has ultimate supremacy. Jesus is King of Kings, and it's about time our nation returned in humble submission to his lordship.
You are not protecting women. You are authorizing the destruction of 500,000 little women every year.
I didn't start it. But, sir, with all due respect, that's the argument of a 5-year-old. I didn't start it.
Right, when the Spirit comes upon people, they go to war, they go to battle, and the enemies of God are driven back and they're slaughtered.
You are listening to Cross Politic with Gabe Wrench, the Water Boy, Pastor Toby Sumter, and the Chocolate Knox.
Hello, y'all. Welcome to Cross Politic. Thank you for joining us. I'm excited. I'm here with Knox and Pastor Toby, and I'm excited about this because we got a special guest on the show, which we'll get to in a second. But before that, I want to introduce our topic. We're going to solve all issues regarding church and race and everything.
No, not us.
In this show.
No.
We're going to do it.
Dr. Lucas.
Dr. Sean Lucas.
He's going to solve the world.
He's going to help us.
Exactly. Yeah.
Hey, Dr. Lucas, thank you for joining us.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
We set the bar high.
There we go. He's going to solve all the problems, church and race, in the next 40 minutes. Dr. Sean Michael Lucas has taught at RTS since 2011, was elected Chancellor's Professor of Church History in 2017 while continuing as Senior Minister of Independent Presbyterian Church. I don't know how you do that. How you do an independent? I don't know. We'll ask him about that.
We'll ask him. That's part of it. It's a paradox.
It's like 3 in 1, like the Trinity.
That's right.
Yeah.
From Memphis, Tennessee, he graduated from Bob Jones University with a BA degree in Pastoral Studies in 1993, has an MA in Theology and Church History 1994, and received a PhD from Westminster Theological Seminary in Philadelphia in Historical and Theological Studies and the American Reformed Tradition in 2002.
Wow.
He's previously served in several other PCA churches, as well as he was a faculty member and administrator at Covenant Theological Seminary out of St. Louis.
Yes.
He and his wife, Sarah, have 4 children.
All baptized.
I
beat you to it.
Wow,
I beat you to it.
way to go.
We're pretty, they're baptized. They're baptized, we know.
I don't know, that independent and that Presbyterian made me nervous.
All right. Are they baptized, Dr. Lucas?
Yes, they are. Got to do that in order to be ordained.
That was close. That was close.
In your free time, it says you enjoy running and following your beloved St. Louis Cardinals. It's a pleasure to have you on Cross Politic. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks to be with. Good to be with you.
So, as you know, what we want to talk about today is what I think you've actually termed, Dr. Lucas, the lost legacy of Black Presbyterian. And I want to just kick things off, first of all, by kind of just questioning the title a little bit. Why is race even a category that Christians should recognize or give special attention to? What I mean is, I've never heard about the lost legacy of blue-eyed Presbyterians or red-headed Presbyterians or the lost legacy of left-handed Presbyterians. Why should we give special attention to Black Presbyterians?
Well, because the legacy of all those folks that you've mentioned has actually been written, right? I mean, it's, the story of Presbyterianism, at least the received story of Presbyterianism, is the story of white, sometimes blue-eyed, sometimes red-headed, often left-handed, but largely European-American Presbyterians. And yet there's this missing storyline of a significant body within Presbyterianism that, and particularly American Presbyterianism, that has gone untold. And it was one of the things that really, I think, struck me forcibly. I mean, going through a PhD program in American Reformed tradition at Westminster Theological Seminary, where I studied with D.G. Hart, a notable American religious historian.
Yeah, sure.
And at no point did we talk about anything regarding Black Presbyterianism outside of what the Southern Presbyterians thought about slavery. And yet there's this notable stream of Black Presbyterianism that contributes to the larger Presbyterian story, and that's a story that needs to be told.
Man, so I saw your video, The Lost Legacy. I recommend everybody goes to YouTube and watches it. It's a really good video. Just a real quick history for me. When I became Reformed, one of the hardest things for me to do was to go to where I thought sound doctrine was being taught. So I came from a charismatic background to, don't laugh, Christian Missionary Alliance, which to me at that point looked like a Calvinist, super reformed Geneva. It's like I walked into Geneva leaving from a charismatic church. And one of the things that I wish that I had known then was just how much I was actually welcome into the Reformed community. And so watching your video really opened up just kind of like, for Black people, you're not coming in here just like in fourth quarter. You've actually been a part of this narrative and this story a long, long time before you ever showed up.
Yeah, I think that's actually, having taught at both Covenant Seminary and Reformed Theological Seminary, for African American students who make it to those Reformed seminaries, often they're told that the Reformed and Presbyterian tradition is a white tradition. That's not our theology. That's not our tradition, they're told. And so being able to talk about Black Presbyterian leaders like a John Gloucester or a Theodore Wright or a Francis Grimke, all thoroughly Reformed. Grimke was one of Charles Hodge's last students at Princeton, and was praised by James McCosh, with whom he took classes at Princeton College. So he was a full-on, not just 5-point Calvinist, but fully subscribed to the Westminster Standards, and yet twice moderator of his presbytery, Washington City Presbytery. I mean, this is a story of 50 years of pastoral ministry that needs to be told, because it's not just, in the end it's a Black Presbyterian story, but it's really our story.
That's right.
Because we all are this thing together, the body of Christ. And so, anyways, yes, it's absolute. These are stories that need to be told and championed and cherished in the same breath that we would champion and cherish the stories of a Thornwell or a Dabney or a Palmer.
One of the things that I wanted to ask you is, why is it that the historical Black church is overarchingly Baptistic?
Yeah, well, so part of that's the origin story of the historic Black church. So historic Black church, we typically, historians typically use that name for about 6 denominations that collectively make up the historic Black church. So the AME, the African Methodist Episcopal Church, and then AME Zion, before the war, Civil War, a Colored Methodist Episcopal Church, and then the National Baptist Convention, the Progressive National Baptist Convention, and the Church of God in Christ. Those 6 denominations typically make up the historic Black church. Part of the reason why the historic Black church has been largely Methodist / Baptist is because of the separate organizations that those leaders formed, not because they wanted to. African Americans would have been more than happy to have remained within the Methodist Church and the various Baptist conventions, but they were actually forced out. And so Richard Allen led the formation of the AME in part because African Americans were forced from the ground floor to the balcony of a particular congregation in New York City, and then from the balcony they were being forced to give up their seats from there. And so they left at that service and actually went to form their own communion because they basically were told they weren't wanted. Same thing happens with the Baptist in the Baptist tradition. White Baptists don't want Black Baptists in their churches, and if they are in their churches, they want them in the balcony. They want them to remain silent, and so it was deemed better to basically have black missionaries to their own people and form their own congregations. So the separate organizations with African Americans forced out of white churches led to the formation of the historic black church. But in Presbyterianism, that doesn't happen. In Presbyterianism, black churches are formed within presbyteries, and there's really little desire on the part of either whites or blacks for a separate Presbyterian denomination, which makes the Presbyterian narrative really interesting, because there's this wonderful opportunity on the one side to learn what interracial cooperation could look like, centered on the Word of God and the standards. But on the other side, because whites aren't willing to listen to their black brothers are constantly calling for justice and for to live out the faith that we commonly believe. So it creates a really interesting dynamic within the Presbyterian Church.
How many black Presbyterian churches are there within the PCA?
Yeah, so there's it's a part of the story, right? Which is both within mainline Presbyterianism and within conservative Presbyterianism, the PCA and others. We've not done a good job when it comes to loving our African American brothers well. So in the mainline church, as of 2010, there were only 80,000 black Presbyterians in the mainline Presbyterian church. Okay. In the PCA, we have around 55 black teaching elders. Most of them are either solo pastors, a few assistant pastors, and then several campus ministers with RUF. And that's 55 out of 4,500 approximately. So it's this narrative where we've not done well as if you will, as white leaders, giving power away and listening to our brothers and helping them see that no, actually the Presbyterian story is a black and white story, and many other races besides. And so
I'm going to track that down, but I want to save that for some of the second segment, because there's a lot to that right there. The thing that I wanted to ask you too was black Presbyterians stayed in Presbyterian churches, right? The black Presbyterians that stayed in the Presbyterian churches. It seems like when you look back through history, they weren't the ones who were engaged in the social movements of our culture, like civil rights movements, black voting rights movements. They seem to be somewhere else, and it seems most of that is run by black Baptistic ministers instead of our black Presbyterian ministers. What in the world? Did they miss out on that?
Well, that's certainly true in the 20th century. In the 19th century, though, particularly before the Civil War, black Presbyterian pastors actually were heavily invested in trying to urge their brothers and sisters on to justice issues. And so particularly when it comes to education, again, following a Scottish tradition in many ways where church and school go together. Mm-hmm. So black Presbyterian leaders were doing the same thing, urging for their white counterparts both to invest in black churches, but also to help support, if we're not going to have integrated schools in the antebellum period, at least let's raise up schools where young men especially, but young men and young women, but young men especially, can be equipped educationally to be workers, but also pastors. And so men like Theodore Wright would be heavily invested in starting what were called Phoenix schools. He started this thing called the Phoenix Society, where the Phoenix Society started these Phoenix schools that provided elementary education to young African Americans, and then from there could pursue collegiate level education at schools that were provided, like the Oneida Institute. So yes, I mean they're not necessarily involved in voter rights, but that's because in the antebellum period, particularly, that wasn't even conceivable.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Really the question is more education, and then, journalism is another area. Samuel Cornish, who founded the first black Presbyterian church in New York City, also started the first black newspaper called Freedom's Journal. Yeah. And and would start 2 other newspapers, the Rights of All and the Colored American.
Moses,
so they
go ahead.
Yeah, so they were both for pastoring their churches, but also active civically in those ways.
What was the purpose for Cornish starting the newspaper? I remember you talking about that in one of your lectures.
Yeah, so Freedom's Journal, the main communication device for all Americans were the newspapers, and so it wasn't unusual for Presbyterians to have their own newspapers. So in Virginia in the 19th century, you could subscribe certainly to the Richmond Enquirer, which was a Calhoun Democrat paper, but you could also get the same news with a religious bent in the Central Presbyterian. And so the same thing's happening in New York with Cornish. He starts his newspaper Freedom's Journal. On the one side, it provides news that you could access in other places, but he also uses the columns to rebut the racist attacks from other New York City newspapers upon blacks and especially black Presbyterians. And especially he used it to refute the arguments of the American Colonization Society. The American Colonization Society had a number of Presbyterian leaders involved, and of course the idea was to purchase the freedom of slaves and then ship them to Africa.
Right.
And Cornish's point was, no, we don't want to go back to Africa because we're not Africans.
Yeah.
We're Americans.
We're born here. We're born here now.
Raised here.
Yeah.
This is our country. We don't want to leave it. And so Freedom's Journal served as a way of rebutting those arguments.
As you've studied this, Dr. Lucas, I'm curious what Presbyterianism brings with it this deep, you've already referenced the Scottish history behind it, but a confessional heritage that it thinks broadly about all of life under the lordship of Jesus. How does the legacy of the civil rights, sort of as it was being explored and built out in confessional Presbyterianism, are there any unique things about that we need to learn from for today?
Yeah, well, I think particularly on the, if you will, the white Presbyterian side, the spirituality of the church doctrine has, at least Southern Presbyterians in the 19th century, tried to root their understanding of the spirituality of the church doctrine in prior Scottish understandings. So Stuart Robinson, who was a significant theologian in the Southern Church in Kentucky during the Civil War, particularly tried to justify his stance of neutrality when it came to speaking to issues related to the war back in a prior Scottish understanding. But the spirituality of the church doctrine, which basically is the idea that the mission of the church is spiritual, the church should not speak to issues that are either political or social, and that then became the way that Southern Presbyterians avoided talking about race.
Two kingdoms.
Yeah. So yes, a basis that has in its most extreme forms can be taken to a two kingdoms perspective.
So that's a lesson we should not do that. we don't want to follow that example.
Yeah. So I mean, spirituality of the church became a way of kind of justifying slavery before the war and then justifying segregation after the war. Not so much explicitly, but implicitly by saying, no, this is a social issue. We can't talk about it. So black Presbyterians, they pushed against that and said, no, wait, actually justice it's a Bible issue.
Yeah.
It's in Micah, it's in Amos, it's in Jesus, it's in Paul.
Right.
And so this is not it's not some kind of add-on. It's right there in the pages of Scripture, and it's actually right there in the confession and in the catechisms, which speak to issues of justice all the way through. So spirituality of the church gets understood in a different fashion in black Presbyterianism, and yet there is a spirituality of the church doctrine there too. It's just a recognition that that while it comes to specific policies, perhaps the church shouldn't speak to specific policies, but when it comes to issues of race and justice, the Bible has tons to say about that, and it would be wrong not to speak on those issues.
Yeah.
I even think we have something to say on some of the policy stuff.
Yeah.
But when we come back, more with Dr. Lucas, I want to ask him why the evangelicalism is marked as the new white devil. Maybe he has an answer for that.
Yeah, right?
When we come back on Cross Politics. Get ready, Dr. Lucas. You got some explaining to do.
Classical Conversation supports homeschooling parents by cultivating the love of learning through a Christian worldview in fellowship with other families. We provide a classical, Christ-centered curriculum, local, like-minded communities across the United States and in several countries, and we train parents who are striving to be great classical educators in the home. For more information and to get connected, please visit our website at classicalconversations.com. Classical, Christian, get connected, get community.
I'm a 2009 graduate of New St. Andrews College, and I'm a commercial property manager.
3 kids at Logos, 1 at home still, and I do flowers on the side out of our house. When you have these little people that you're responsible to shepherd, you realize I need to know what I'm talking about because they need to have a firm foundation and they need deep roots so that they don't get blown over and that they're ready to stand up for the truth.
I am a programmer. The language aspect of NSA is a fantastic preparation for any sort of programming.
I'm a real estate broker here in town. I think absolutely the perfect education for being in sales of really any kind.
I actually put it to a lot of great use when I was working in the political realm.
I am a pastor in Central Coast, California. Whatever vocation you take, it'll make you take that seriously because you're seeing it through the lens of the sovereignty and lordship of Christ.
For more information, visit us online at nsa.edu.
Welcome back to Cross Politics.
It's Black History Month.
Special edition. Oh, it is Black History Month.
Oh, you didn't know? You didn't know why we were doing this?
This episode is brought to you by Black History Month. And with us today, we got the good Dr. Sean Lucas bringing us up to speed on the lost legacy of Black Presbyterians. Chocolate Knox is not the only one.
There's more.
No, not at all.
No, I want to pick this up. We right before the break.
Yeah.
I asked this question about and Dr. Lucas points out the spirituality of the church ends up becoming this thing becomes a justification then for not caring about justice, which just seems real. As you were talking, Dr. Lucas, it just seems so strange and bizarre given the historic roots of Presbyterianism, rooted in massive political unrest in England and Scotland.
Yeah, right.
Fighting for the rights of common people, justice issues. The English Civil War, the Westminster Confession of Faith comes out of.
We're built on this.
Right?
Yeah.
And then, of course, people running across the Atlantic to the United States to found this new country. Many of the leading generals of the Revolutionary Army were Presbyterian ministers. Fighting for the rights. I mean, what happened? Where did we lose that understanding of, yes, the church is spiritual, but the church touches down. The church cares about the things of this world. It cares about justice and mercy. What happened, do you think?
Yeah, so I think part of what happened is that Westminster Confession of Faith 31:4, which is the confessional paragraph in which the spirituality of the church finds its basis. It was originally written, as you guys point out, in the context of an assembly that was actually called by the state in order to establish new state religion.
Right.
Yeah. And yet, when it comes to America, in an atmosphere of church-state separation, and in fact, church disestablishment, that church-state separation, I think, gets read back into the document, so that church-state disestablishment or church-state separation actually gets read as faith-life separation in ways that are just extremely unhelpful. And so when it comes into the 19th century, Southern Presbyterians particularly use the spirituality of the church doctrine very strategically to avoid addressing issues related to slavery, segregation, and race. But they're more than happy to ignore spirituality of the church when it fits their purposes. Like, for example, from the 1880s all the way through the Volstead Act, which was the constitutional amendment that banned the manufacture and sale of beverage alcohol.
Right.
Southern Presbyterians repeatedly in their General Assembly approved overtures and declarations in support of national prohibition.
Oh, wow.
But where was the spirituality of the church then?
Yeah, right. Right.
There's other examples like that throughout conservative Presbyterian history, where denominations that defended spirituality of the church conveniently forgot it when it was an issue they cared about, whether it was teaching of evolution or more recently in the PCA, abortion. We've certainly spoken on abortion, homosexuality. We've spoken on public policy issues related to homosexuality. But even when in 2015 and 16, when we went through the process of confessing our covenantal relationship in the sins of the 1960s, there were a number of folks who were trying to deploy the spirituality of the church at that point and say, no, we don't really have anything to say to those issues, which just struck me so odd, and really I think is a misapplication of the spirituality of the church.
One of the questions that we've kicked around as we've worked on this here at this podcast is one of the concerns we have is, I mean, we're very much concerned with issues of justice, issues of racial reconciliation, and it's one of the themes that we come back to over and over again. At the same time, we're also aware of the fact that we live in a world, in a culture, that is constantly trying to press the church into its mold.
Right.
And over and over again, the world sets an agenda, and then a lot of times the church then scrambles to sort of keep up with the agenda. And if the world says, okay, you can care about this, then the church comes along running, Johnny come lately. Yeah. Oh yeah, we care.
Oh, we desegregate now?
Okay,
okay, everybody,
desegregate.
We'll desegregate.
We'll do it. but it ends up being this. We're rather than us being salt and light and leading the way, we end up, taking, we join the crusade once the world tells us it's okay. And so I guess one question I have for you then, Dr. Lucas, is, okay, we're all about, we know there's racial sin in this country. We know that we need to repent. We know that we need to be the body of Christ. Water is thicker than blood. The blood of Jesus is what unites us all together. Amen. But how do we fight this? How do we join our voices to this in a way though that doesn't cede the authority to the world? Because the world right now is telling us, of course, that racism is the worst sin in the world. I mean, that's what our pagan overlords right now are telling us, that, white supremacy is like the worst, most heinous sin ever. It's perfectly fine, for two guys to shack up. But if you're a white supremacist, you're burning in hell forever.
And black supremacy is amazing.
And black supremacy is totally cool.
Yeah.
But so, I mean, this is the world we live in, and it's like, and we have to be faithful here, which means that we can't pretend away sins that are there. But how do we address these things in a faithful way that doesn't cede authority to the world? Does that make sense, what I'm asking?
Yeah, I think so. I think, as Christians, part of the problem really has been that as Christians, we've not dealt, at least in America, we've not dealt well with this. And so at some level, we are honestly Johnny come lately, and yet God in his mercy, used religious leaders like a Dr. King or a Reverend James Lawson, who doctrinally probably wouldn't pass muster in a Presbyterian church, and yet God undoubtedly used them to raise this issue and to appeal to the consciences of white Christians to say, wait, you're not living into your theology. Now that now that our consciences are pricked, now we have to take the lead so that we're not reactive, but to say, Ephesians 2 is right. The cross has torn down the dividing wall between white and black, and the blood of Jesus is our only hope on this issue. But God is creating one new humanity, and it's only in the church that this is going to happen. My friend Russ Whitfield, who's a PCA pastor in Washington, D.C., he says that cross-centeredness is the only way for cross-cultural to happen. Mm-hmm. And I think that's exactly right. And so the problem is that we go the white majority and particularly, I'll just use my own camp, the PCA, we tend to do this in fits and starts. So instead of being consistent that, no, this is not like a one-off, or this is, the issue of the day, but this is who we are. We want to lean into the Church of Revelation 7, the New Heavens, New Earth Church.
Yeah.
That's the church we're already part of, and we need to see that now at some level. We'll never be perfect, but we need to see that now, and that means we have to be intentional in working towards those towards realizing that vision. So I think there's a certain kind of intentionality where we have to say we've not done well with this, but God helping us, we will do better with it now.
Yeah, and I think the way I've taken Toby's question and how I've kind of worked through it is, it seems to me that probably the biggest problem with the church, if I was going to kind of narrow it down to three areas, and this isn't just the PCA. I grew up in the PCA. I'll just say this is kind of American church general, is that there's been a lack of moral aptitude in our church leadership. And then I would say number two, we have a real father problem in our churches. And I would say number three, how we disciple, how we educate our kids. But go back to number one, it seems to me, especially on this issue of race, is that our church in the U.S. and even in the PCA. So I was a member of three different PCA churches in three different states, and that everywhere I went, there was some sort of moral failure of church leadership, which created, I think, I was just thinking, when I was thinking about this topic, I was thinking, how could the PCA 30, 40 years ago identify and break off from the PCUSA church over liberalism? How could they do that and see the right? They knew where this river was floating, and this is even before the PCUSA got this extreme that we're now. Yeah. But then they can't identify segregation and the sin of racism and their own segregation of policies
at the same time.
This all happened at the same time, and I think it's because this is my, I guess, kind of my only stab at this is because the leadership in my own denomination, my own PCA, is somehow morally compromised because we can't see things clearly.
No, I think that's a good analysis. It's basically what I try to argue in my history of the PCA for continuing church, which the larger context in which the PCA is birthed is this kind of. It's the same worldview that ultimately shapes modern American political conservatism. It's anti-communism, anti-integration, and anti-centralization. And so these things come together, and they're bound together by a conservative religion. Conservative religion holds it together, but those three prongs, that really is the worldview. And so at some level, the generations leading up to 1973 were culturally captive, and they had this huge blind spot when it came to issues of race that they were culpable for, I think, but and I would say, but yet it was the case. So you had this strange amalgamation or intertwining of Christian religion or conservative religion, politics, and social mores that was largely unexamined. And so the big question for us today is always, when we do this kind of cross-cultural work and we look back over time and we say, how in the world could that happen? Is to always be asking the question, okay, so where are our cultural blind spots today?
Right.
it seems as though the younger generation of evangelicals and even PCA folk have gotten tired of the culture wars, particularly in relationship to abortion. And so there's been a tendency to downplay talking about abortion and rather focusing on other issues, whether race or immigration or, well, we need to talk about race and immigration, but we also have to be for the unborn.
Right.
And that gets to that issue that you were talking about kind of do we have a moral aptitude, an ethical commitment to the law of God working out in a life. That's the thing we have to keep working. It's not either or; it's a both and.
So we had we did a live show with Pastor Doug Wilson and Vodi Bakum, two pastoral figures who are not really looked at as Vodi has a white card now. The black church doesn't really look to him for any guidance and leadership, and Pastor Wilson has written on slavery in a kind of unfavorable way on this issue. And so they've been disregarded on this topic. We had him on our show, and one of the questions that we asked him, I thought it was one of the most productive discussions I ever had on Church and Race. And one of the questions we asked him was to Vodi, what are the sins of the white people in all this? And then to Pastor Doug, we asked him, what are the sins of the black people? So we flipped. We spent most of the show.
We wanted to make the whole internet angry. We just wanted to blow the whole thing up.
We want to tick everybody off.
Yeah.
We'd spent most of the time, Vodi had spent most of the time talking about the sins of black people, and Doug had spent most of the time talking about the sins of white people in this whole issue. And then we flipped that on him at the end. And I thought, that was an interesting way to handle the issue, because we've actually spent most of the time talking about the sins of white PCA.
Sure.
On this show right here, right now.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of responsibility because we've kind of held most of the leadership positions on this subject when it comes up. So I have no problem emphasizing that discussion. But also in all this, it seems like there is a real kind of sin of the blacks on this issue. And I don't see much discussion and accountability being held on our black brothers and sisters on this issue also. I mean, even Lecrae recently came out and said, I'm leaving white evangelicalism.
Yeah.
How divisive is that?
Well, the evangelicalism he's talking about, I'd leave too.
Right. And I think that gets even to the whole issue. And lots of folks have been talking about it, and of course, since I was one of Daryl Hart's students, I mean, I'm well trained in thinking, what is evangelicalism?
Right.
It's really kind of a construct of sorts. And I mean, if Robert Jeffers is white evangelicalism, I'm not that.
That's right.
I'm with Lecrae.
Yeah.
But I think that point's well taken. One of the things, when at my previous church, I was in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. And one of the beautiful things God did there was interracial partnership between our church, First Presbyterian Church, and Ebenezer Missionary Baptist Church. And out of that, we pulled a number of white and black pastors together for lunch. And I remember talking to one of my black pastor colleagues, and he was actually, his church worshiped in the old First Presbyterian Church. We sold our building to his church and then moved west as the city was moving west. And but I talked to him about the possibility, hey, it would be great to do a joint service in y'all's space, which is the old First Pres space. I think it would be great for us. It'd be
Yeah.
And he said, well, I'm for it, but it's going to take a lot of work with my people to get there. And it was one of those first kind of aha moments that said, oh, wait, this isn't just a my folk issue.
Yeah.
This is a his folk issue too.
Yeah.
And it was helpful to kind of remember that. I think though just speaking as a white Presbyterian pastor, I don't think I can let my people off the hook recognizing that. It's one of the things that Ligon Duncan said when we were working our way through the racial reconciliation overture process in the PCA. He said, we, as white guys, we have to keep apologizing until our black brothers said, all right, you got it. That's enough. We believe you. Let's go forward. And I found that helpful as a way of kind of having a mindset because another friend of mine, Adolphus Weary, he said, Sean, black people, we don't want to go back there either. We don't want to go back to the past. It's way too painful.
Yeah.
But we'll take you by the hand and go back there to make sure that you understand it. And once we're convinced you understand it, then let's go forward together.
Yeah.
And to me, I think that's a really good word also.
I really love John Ligon Duncan, and far be it for me to disagree with him on anything, but I really have to disagree with him on that. I mean, because for me, as a Christian brother, if a brother apologizes to me, then I forgive him 70 times 7 and so on. If he even tried to put me in slavery again, he says, I'm sorry, man. I'm going to say, I forgive you, and we're going to move on. I don't think that it's fair to try and put somebody, if my son gets offended by his sister, and he's like, and she's like, I just feel like I need to say sorry 1,000 times until he forgives me.
Until you understand.
Well, no, not at all. It's his sin now. It's his sin that he's not forgiving his sister, his brother, his blood, his family. And for the body, we're tied together with something much more than just blood. We're tied together by the bond of Jesus Christ and his blood. Yeah. So if a brother comes to you and says, I'm sorry, then you drop it and you say, man, you know what? I sin too. I deserve the same thing you deserve, but we both at the foot of the cross. You know what I mean? And so I hear that a lot, but it's like, no, there's a responsibility to forgive your brother because of the gospel, and they don't have to tell you how sorry they are. You forgive them even if they don't ask you to forgive them. You know what I mean? Because we're Christians.
I think that's fair. I think probably part of what Lig was getting at.
Don't tell him I said this, by the way. Don't tell him I just
don't relate no message.
No, make sure he listens to this so he hears all that.
Please don't tell him.
I do think that probably and I experienced this and heard this as we went through that process in 2015, 2016, is that there were a lot of guys, a lot of our elders, teaching elders and ruling elders, who, just sad to say, were not ready to confess. They were not ready to say they were like, do we have to do this again? And I was like, well, one time would be good, because we apologized for 1861, but 1961, when most of us, when the founders were around, we didn't talk about that. And so I think probably what he was getting at is, is there a heartfelt sense of, I really am sorry. I do see my covenantal participation in this. Yes, I wasn't alive, but I have benefited from my founding, my predecessors, my ancestors, who did this and said this. I mean, the church I serve now, the reason why we're called Independent Presbyterian Church is because we were founded in 1965 out of Second Pres here in Memphis. As a result of the kneel-ins. White and black students from Rhodes College came and tried to integrate the services at Second Pres. They were kept away. In 1965, the session changed their policy at Second Pres to admit people regardless of race and color. And in response to that, 230 people left, including half of the elders, to form Independent Presbyterian Church. Our church had in its bylaws until 1983 that we would operate on a segregated basis.
Wow.
So this isn't like, this is real.
That's crazy. Yeah.
All right. So,
and I think some of this too is, it's hard to, I didn't grow up in the South.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
No,
and I just like this is, I just don't
know these things.
I don't have any categories for this.
Well, that's what goes with what I'm about to say now. This question here is, you were talking about in your Lost Legacy video. I want to hit on that.
Okay.
Lost Legacy video, you said that black Presbyterians have a hard time making their way in white structures of the PCA, right? The Presbyterianism.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of white people hear that and like, whoa, dude, what are you talking about? We're biblical. This ain't about whiteism. this ain't
about structure.
We didn't get together and say, hey, what's our white structure? Because we want to be different than those black guys. No one drew that up. And so a lot of people are hearing that, and because they're not from the South, they don't have that tension that's there. Like just in 2012, people don't know, a high school in Mississippi had their first integrated black prom. Like, this is serious issues here.
Right.
Right.
So a lot of people hear that and they're shocked. So what do you mean by like white structures?
Yeah, what is that?
Well, yeah. So the PCA until 2 years ago, we had never had a minority race person as the chairman of the Overtures Committee. We had never had a minority race person as chairman of the Nominations Committee. Certainly never had anyone but white guys as moderator of the General Assembly. And so it was a structure in which the leadership positions, the key positions, were held by people who looked just like me.
On purpose?
I don't think there was an intentionality, but I think there was, at some level, yes, it's natural that, we think, oh, who would be good for this position? Well, my friend over here, or this prominent, large steeple pastor guy, or whatever.
The good old boy network.
Yeah, it becomes an old, or when I served in Mississippi, I called it the old Mississippi way.
Yeah.
The current governor of Mississippi, Phil Bryant, is the first governor of Mississippi who was not a graduate from either Ole Miss or Mississippi State. So 200 years of history, every governor either went to Ole Miss or Mississippi State. Phil went to Southern Miss, which was is the little brother of those two schools.
Scandalous.
But that's because that's how it works, and that's how it worked within the church, within the PCA. Thankfully,
how do you
that's changed?
Yeah. How do you distinguish though between, so on the one hand, people that are intentionally, disqualifying people because of the color of their hair, or the color of their skin, or whatever, where they're from, or where they went to college. Obviously, okay, that's not just. It's not at all. It's not just. But on the other hand, how do you avoid turning, affirming, doing something kind of like affirmative action in the church, where like now you have like quotas, like we need to make sure that we have, 3 African moderators and 3.
One Chinese.
Oh, David's black. Grab him.
Yeah, and then like and which is that's disrespectful. That's unjust too.
Yeah. Well, yeah, maybe. But on the other hand, if you have 2 guys who are equally, qualified, the tendency has been in the PCA to, are you going to choose the guy with the last name Kim or Park, or are you going to choose the other guy? What we've typically done is choose the other guy. And so at some level, how do we become a church where, at least periodically, doesn't have to be all the time, but periodically everyone has someone in leadership that says, oh, he's like me. To me, that's one of the cool things that I'm so excited for this weekend with Black Panther coming out, because all of my African American friends are so excited. Here you have pretty much an all black cast, and they're heroes. And here are people who look like me, and they're not bad guys. They're heroes. And so to me, to have like Erwin Ince, African American teaching elder, who's the first black man to chair the Overtures Committee, that was just so significant. Or Alex Junn, who was the first Korean American, first minority to be moderator of the General Assembly, a ruling elder from California.
Yeah,
to
Leon
me,
Brown.
that was really important. So,
one of the things that, and you brought up Black Panther, I hope you got your dashiki ready to go up to the theater opening night. But I'm going to lose my black card on this one. But that's okay. I've lost it many times over, but hey, I'm raising my kids to love the Lord, so I don't care. But one of the things that scares me, and since you brought up Black Panther, is that I see Black Panther and I see all my black brothers and sisters excited about this film, and yet when you step back and look at it, you see the homosexual movement behind it, and you see feminism that's kind of tucked into this Trojan horse. So you accept all this blackism on the front of it, and you're so excited about what's going on. And then you got Hollywood on the other side stuffing this pig full of feminism and homosexuality, and now you got to eat the whole thing. And that's what scares me about some of this, is that yes, we want to do that, but what's getting brought in, what's the Trojan horse of this too that we need to be aware of? And so I don't want to be so excited about something and then miss out and say, oh man, we really shot ourselves in the foot there.
Yeah.
So
and that's what I see. That's what I see happening with, Dr. Lucas was mentioning earlier that you got this, a lot of the younger generation getting tired of the culture war stuff. And this, I think I see tons of them jumping on this social justice warrior train,
which we need to be on. Which we need to deal with.
I don't want to be on that train.
We need to deal with social justice, no doubt.
Right, but I want to do it by biblical standards.
Yeah.
Fully biblical standards. I want to do it because Jesus says we've got to do it. It's obedience to the law. and it's justice, but there's a social justice warrior train
Yeah.
that's taking you somewhere you don't want to go.
And I think they want to be in the same way as biblical as we are, but I don't think that they're always seeing what's underneath all of that.
I agree completely. Yeah. Wow, Dr. Lucas, thank you so much for your time. We ran over time, and you've been very kind.
Yeah,
thank you so much. Please go check out Dr. Lucas's video, Tell the Truth, on YouTube.
Is there any books that he's got coming out or anything?
Dr. Lucas, what's your latest book?
So the last book was For Continuing Church, The Roots of the Presbyterian Church in America. It came out in 2015.
Okay.
Go get it.
Go get it.
Check it out.
Until next week, love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. Go fight, laugh, and feast. This is Cross Politics.